Welcome to Cheat Masters. Join us for relatable cheating stories that will make you laugh, cry, and nod your head in recognition. Things started to feel off a while ago, probably about 6 months back. My wife of 17 years, the woman I thought I knew inside and out, began acting strange. She'd always been the 9-to-5 type, dedicated to her job at Target. But suddenly, she was leaving for work at the crack of dawn and coming home well past dinner time, always with some half-baked excuse about inventory checks or extra shifts. Now, I'm no fool, and I sure as hell ain't blind. I knew something was going on, but I also knew better than to point fingers without any real proof. My gut was telling me she was up to something, but you can't confront your wife of nearly 2 decades on a hunch. The late nights became a regular thing, and she brushed off my concerns like they were nothing. Always the same story. Work was crazy, babe, or we were short-staffed. I can't let them down, but something in her voice didn't sit right. It was like she was rehearsing her lines, and not very convincingly either. She wasn't just physically absent. Her mind seemed to be elsewhere, too. We'd sit down for dinner, and she'd just pick at her food, barely making any conversation. This was the woman who used to chat my ear off about her day, and now it felt like pulling teeth to get a sentence out of her. Our home felt different, colder somehow. It was like living with a stranger, not the woman I had shared nearly half my life with. I knew I had to do something, but what? How was I supposed to catch her? I didn't have time to follow her around. I did some digging on my own, but I couldn't find anything unusual on the phone bill. The only thing that stood out was how late she was coming home from work. Really late. That's when it hit me. I needed help. I needed a private investigator. Hiring a private investigator wasn't something I'd ever imagined doing, but desperate times call for desperate measures, don't they? My wife was slipping away, and I needed to know if my worst fears were true. I searched online and found a private investigator with good reviews, so I decided to give him a call. The investigator was a seasoned pro, been in the business for over 20 years. He was gruff, no nonsense, and straight to the point. I respected that. I told him everything. The sudden late nights, the lack of communication, and my suspicion that my wife might be cheating. He listened, nodding in all the right places, then laid out his plan. He told me he'd follow my wife, document her activities, and try to figure out what she was really up to. He promised to be discreet, saying he wouldn't alert her to his presence so as not to tip her off. It felt wrong, going behind her back like that, but at the same time, I knew I had to know the truth. So I gave him the green light. I handed over some photos of my wife, her car, and details about her daily routine. The investigator told me he'd start his surveillance the next day and would keep me updated on his progress. As I left his office, I felt a mix of fear and relief. I feared what he might find, but there was also a strange sense of calm. I was finally doing something, finally taking control of the situation. Now, it was just a matter of waiting. Well, waiting wasn't easy. Let me tell you, every day felt like a test of patience. I hoped the investigator would call with some news, but the days turned into a week, and still, there was nothing to my wife continued her late-night work routines, and the house grew colder with her silence. It felt like waiting for a storm, the calm before the chaos. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, my phone buzzed one afternoon. It was the investigator. He said he had some news and asked me to meet him at his office. My heart pounded in my chest as I drove over there. I could feel the fear building in my throat. I was scared of what I was about to find out, but I knew I had to face it, whatever it was. He sat behind his desk, a hard look on his face. He told me he'd been following my wife, just like he promised, and that he had found something. My heart sank. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear what he was about to say. The investigator handed over a file. Inside were pictures of my wife, but she wasn't at Target. Instead, she was with a man, laughing, hugging, kissing. My world spun. The investigator explained that the man was an old college boyfriend of hers. The one she had abruptly broken up with all those years ago, before we got together. My blood was boiling. She had been lying to me. She had been cheating. The investigator told me he was sorry. He knew this wasn't what I wanted to hear. But the truth was right there in black and white. My wife, my partner of 17 years, had betrayed me. It felt like my world had just crumbled. I thanked the investigator, paid him for his services, and left his office, my mind spinning with the betrayal. After I left, I drove around for a bit, my thoughts and emotions racing. I felt betrayed, hurt, angry. She had lied to me. My own wife, the woman I had been with for 17 years. It was a lot to process, but I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just let this slide. I took a deep breath and decided to confront her. I got home before she did and prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation. I poured myself a stiff drink, sat down in our living room and waited. When she walked through the door, she looked surprised to see me. She asked if I was okay, and I just looked at her for a moment. I hesitated. Then I pulled out the pictures the investigator had given me and tossed them onto the coffee table. She froze. Her eyes went wide as she looked at the pictures, then back at me. The color drained from her face as she realized what was happening. She stammered, trying to explain, but I cut her off. I asked her why. Why had she done it? Why had she lied to me? She burst into tears, saying she was sorry, that it was a mistake, that she never meant to hurt me. But her words were empty, meaningless. The damage was done. I told her I wanted a divorce. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. She looked at me, her eyes full of tears, and begged me to reconsider. But my mind was made up. I had trusted her, and she had broken that trust in the worst possible way. There was no going back. The days following the confrontation were difficult, to put it mildly. My wife kept begging for forgiveness, pleading for another chance. But I told her to stop begging. I wasn't going to change my mind. I met up with a lawyer, a bulldog of a man named Jerry who had been recommended to me by a friend. He listened to my story, shook his head, and said we had a strong case for divorce. I showed him the evidence the investigator had given me, and he nodded, saying it was solid. Meanwhile, my wife was becoming desperate. She was calling me constantly, sending me messages, pleading with me to give her a second chance. But I had heard enough. I was done. She didn't take it well. One day, she showed up at my workplace, tears streaming down her face. She was causing a scene, still begging and pleading for me to give her another chance. My colleagues were watching, some with pity, others with shock. I told her to leave, that this wasn't the place. That's when she lost it. She started shouting, claiming I was abusive, that I had mistreated her. My heart pounded in my chest. This was a serious accusation,